Thank you very much for attending this online version of our poster. I should say that Hannah Taylor, who conducted a lot of this research, has left academia, so you've got me today, but she did a lot of this work. We were interested in whether pupil size, as this very subtle sign of internal states of arousal, could potentially capture attention in the same way as, for example, emotional expressions do in certain contexts. And we were interested in whether this might be modulated by whether a face looked generally more or less trustworthy, with the hypothesis that, for example, a less trustworthy face with dilated pupils as this sign of internal arousal might potentially indicate threat and could be particularly potent in capturing visual attention. So I had some pilot data from a dot probe task run pre-COVID in the lab. Participants saw pairs of faces that were identical, except one would have dilated and the other constricted pupils. The faces were either whole faces or just the eye regions, presented for 750 milliseconds. Half of the faces were highly trustworthy looking faces, and the other faces that looked less trustworthy looking, or low trust faces. What we found was a trust by pupil interaction effect, whereby there was no attention capture effect for pupil size in high trust faces, but a counter to our hypothesis, in low trust faces, it was actually the constricted pupil faces that captured attention, indicated by faster reaction times. So when Hannah conducted her master's thesis, which she did online because of the lockdown using ePrimeGo, she decided to probe the time course of this effect. So she dropped the whole and partial faces, which we hadn't seen a significant effect for, and instead used a shorter ISI of 500 milliseconds mixed with a longer ISI of 1500 milliseconds. And otherwise, the experiment was identical, except the participants were responding to arrow direction targets rather than letter targets. And what Hannah found was this ISI by pupil interaction, no interaction with trust this time, but initial attention capture occurred for faces with constricted pupils, so faster reaction times when the target appeared behind the constricted pupil face, but faster reaction times for the longer ISIs, later attention when the target appeared behind the dilated pupil face. So what we were able to show across these two experiments was that pupil size does appear to capture visual attention, and that in our experiment at least, this occurred most rapidly for faces with constricted pupils, which is counter to our hypothesis, also counter to hypothesis that this would occur also in low trust faces. And we wonder whether this was because looking at our stimuli, our constricted pupils may have been more extreme than our dilated pupils. And we wonder whether this was perhaps sort of made these faces pop out in some sense. In our main experiment, we were, I would say, definitely underpowered to look at the effect of trustworthiness, but the initial pilot experiment suggests that perhaps this attention capture effect for pupil size could be modulated by whether a person looks to be highly trustworthy or less trustworthy. So thank you very much for visiting our poster, and do send me questions if you have any.